Our next session is titled How to Sell Decarbonization in 2026. We have an incredible group of leaders from government and industry to discuss and hopefully debate that question, how to communicate about building decarbonization and its value proposition in today's policy and economic landscape. This is not about a marketing exercise. It's something deeper than that. It's about surfacing the value that we all know is there and how we communicate about it. Our moderator is Fiona Cousins. She's Chief Operating Officer of Total Design at Arup. She has global responsibility for many aspects of Arup's world-leading projects. Many of you know Fiona well. She is also an Arup Fellow. She is a global leader in sustainability, a former US GBC chair, a mayoral appointee to the Local Law 97 Advisory Board, and of course she is also a Director Emeritus of Urban Green's Board of Directors. I want to invite all the session speakers to come on up, and Fiona will introduce our panelists. Thank you. Also, just a reminder while the panelists are getting settled, if folks are standing in the back, there are some chairs up here at the front, so please don't be shy. Come on forward and find some seats. And then also, if you have questions for our panelists during the panel, you can go to slido.com and enter the code UGC and submit questions that then Fiona can pose to the panelists.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the conference. So, how to sell decarbonization in 2026, or the subtitle, I think, is how to talk about climate change in the current environment. And in some ways, this is a slightly funny question. It's the kind of question that this group of people, of whom I am a proud member, asks itself. And as Chissell and Chris and John have already said, this conference has been life-changing because it's the place where people come to kind of unpack what buildings are really for. They create great environments for people, they support economic well-being, and then the conversation here is about how we figure out how to really make them better, not only for their occupants and for their owners, but also for their host communities and for the larger world, which of course includes climate and nature and all of those other things that kind of support those buildings. So this group together has, in a very, very real way, made clear that there is a connection between the built environment and the systems, natural, social, economic, climatic, and so on, that underpin those buildings. And sometimes, at some points in my overlong career, been working slightly longer than John, so I'm thinking maybe retirement's a good option. Didn't say that out loud. And sometimes we have been able to actually sell decarbonization. There's been very friendly environment within which we've been able to create legislation here and elsewhere in the world that has sort of helped to raise decarbonization up the agenda and basically making it non-optional. So we haven't had to sell it because we've sold it at a policy level. And that, of course, has been based on some really excellent communications about climate and all of its impacts. But it's really clear that we find ourselves, I think Mark just described it as a rhetorical and political landscape which is significantly stonier than the one that we were operating in maybe 15 years ago. And so we need to actually now think about what is this sale of decarbonization that we want to do, and is it the decarbonization that we're going to sell, or is it the attendant benefits? So we'll see about that as we go forward on this panel. And I think in my experience at my firm, and also experience at your firms, I think there are some really great stories of things where the decarbonization legislation, whether it's about embodied or operational carbon, has driven people to do things in ways that they otherwise would not have done. There's an example of a project in London where the goal of a 50% reduction in embodied carbon actually was achievable entirely within the project cost, and it achieved a leasing uplift, which is one of those themes that US Green Building Council has been very interested in over a long period of time. Also, a sort of metro station project, again, driven by the decarbonization goals, but it turned out to be much, much less expensive because of the way that the construction goes if you really focus on the decarbonization. Those things are easy if decarbonization is in the legislation or the planning, but where they're not, how do we actually make that sale? So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that from the panel, and the panel is very well placed to be able to answer these questions. So in order of where they're sitting, we have H.G. Chissell, who is the founder and CEO of Advanced Energy Group. He has a background in energy optimization, architecture, and leadership consulting, and he facilitates quarterly engagements that promote understanding, alignment, engagement, and accountability around challenging obstacles to a just and clean energy transition. In order of sitting, so Hrisa Gatzoulis is the Vice President and Head of Sustainability at Rudin. So Rudin is a full-service owner, operator, and developer of commercial and residential real estate in New York City, and Hrisa leads energy, sustainability, and wellness strategy for the firm. Dana is the Senior Vice President for Energy and Sustainability at the Empire State Realty Trust, and so she does all of the things around industry-leading best practices, energy and sustainability initiatives, wellness programs, disclosure and reporting for the Empire State Realty Trust, and has an excellent back catalogue of things that she has led on. And Anthony said that all I had to say about him is that he comes from NYSERDA, but I think we can give him a little bit more than that. He's the Chief Program Officer at NYSERDA and has been working to promote energy efficiency, renewable energy, and emissions reduction across New York's economy and energy system. And has been doing that for quite some time. Everybody here has been doing it for quite some time, none of them quite for the 41 years that I've been working or the 40 years that John has been working, but long enough to know what they're talking about. So with that, I'm going to ask them some questions. All right. So I'm going to start with HG. You work with a really broad spectrum of clients from multiple sectors on advanced energy issues. Have you had to change your approach with this difficult, stony landscape we find ourselves in?
Yeah, I would say the approach is ever-changing to achieve desired outcomes. You can't get stuck in, if the language doesn't serve you, don't get stuck in it, because if you do, there could be some undesirable consequences. I think about what happened with DEI. We got caught in a language that wasn't inclusive enough to help people appreciate why it's so important, and then it got kind of just transitioned out the door. So if decarbonization isn't serving us to have the level of inclusive engagement we need, then we need to develop our language.
And Hrisa, Rudin's got a really long history of implementing energy efficiency and decarbonization across the portfolio. How do you translate that to tenants? What's driving the work that you're doing?
Well, I'll take a step back and say that Rudin, yes, we have a long history. So we just celebrated our centennial this past year. And so Rudin is a family-owned, operating, and developer here in New York City. And so they've always thought of themselves as stewards of New York City. So I take that, carrying that forward is, very important to me. And so, what does that mean for our buildings? We have multifamily and residential buildings. So we have multiple types of tenants. And so I think that it doesn't matter, some tenants are going to care, whether it's an office or residential, and some may not know that they care. So I think it's just really just keeping your story forward. And our buildings are obviously older stock. Over the past 100 years, they've been all developed. And so it's, creating a plan, and sometimes it's like a phase plan, right? Because you need to have carefully plan, whether it's financial planning or just operational planning of how you're going to stage your projects. And it's important then to tell the benefits to the tenant, because the tenant, maybe carbon is just a word to them. Maybe they understand energy efficiency, but they care about the operation of their building. Is it a safe building for them to be in it? Is it bring them joy to be in it? Is it provide safety, health? So I think at the end of the day, whatever projects you're going to do, regardless if they care, did it create an actual benefit to the building, but it's a benefit to them. So I think that's what's the most important thing. It's not, and again, like you said, the language you use, but it's the actual work that you do. How does that benefit them? How does it show? What are the end results? And how do they feel comfortable in the space they are?
Great. Dana, ESRT has a huge and diverse portfolio as well. And I know you've spent a lot of time on health and wellness along with decarbonization. So what's resonating with you at the moment? Have you had to change your language? Have you had to think about things differently?
And I think that's a great question. I'm glad you're asking it. And yes, I think I can speak freely because so we have also focused on energy and sustainability as priorities for a long time, for almost 20 years, and created health and wellness programs, indoor environmental quality programs, and very advanced energy efficiency programs. So energy, emissions, water, waste, healthy buildings. We've focused on this for almost 20 years. And the words that we've used to describe those things have evolved over the last 20 years, but they've evolved over a longer time than that. And Fiona was joking around the length of time all of us have spent in this field. But I would say that when I was studying this in school in the late 90s, there was no word for it. And so we would educate people about what sustainability even meant. And we would have, indigenous people come and speak to us about the seventh generation, about what sustainability meant to them. And so I think it depends on where you're coming from. For me personally, it came from my first year of college and hearing from amazing leaders in this who just said this is the right way to design, it's the best way to design. And then I've spent my career demonstrating the technical, engineering, and economic viability of this kind of work so that whatever words you may use to describe it, there's a business case. And so when we revert to audiences, you have to speak to your audience. If your audience doesn't understand complex engineering, you don't talk about that to them. If your audience doesn't believe in climate change, you can get this message across in other ways. And I think it's really important to understand what your goal is. For us, it's deep energy reduction and environmentally responsible buildings. And there are ways to describe that fit the narrative of the current situation. So we have federal tenants, and we are subject to the executive orders and had to eliminate certain words from our reporting, but they still have the same message.
It's lovely to actually think back on those. It feels a little bit like sustainability has been around forever, but in those mid-90s days, I remember also getting presentations from the seventh generation and the natural step, and it felt really, really far out there at that point because actually we were in maybe the world we're coming back into now where it was about energy efficiency and cost savings and air quality and so on. And so the language wasn't about sustainability actually right at the beginning of my career. I hope it's not just a full circle, however. I don't think I want to live it twice. Anthony, you come from a mega agency in a mega state with a mega ambition for climate progress. So we all know affordability is now front and center across all levels of government everywhere, and especially around utility costs. How are you seeing your way through this moment of being able to talk about or not being able to talk about carbon emissions and climate change?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm grateful to be here today. And as I look out across this room, I see so many experts here that I'm actually humbled to be here with everyone. At NYSERDA, we really try to take a holistic approach to this. And I think we have both the responsibility and opportunity to be solving for several things at once, right? And so, we've heard it here. What are those things? It's health of our buildings. It's public health. It's energy abundance that drives economic development, that drives job creation. It's reliability. It's resiliency, and of course affordability. And I think we have the data to demonstrate that. And Mark Levine was talking a little bit about that, but the state energy plan has shown that for most folks, energy efficiency and beneficial electrification can result in $100 to $300 of monthly energy savings. Our energy efficiency programs to date have saved $2 billion. For every $1 of regional greenhouse gas initiative funds that we invest, we see $6 in savings. So I think the data is out there to demonstrate that affordability is not in conflict with this. We've spent, the state energy plan has also demonstrated that 85% of the investment that's needed in the energy infrastructure would be needed if we took no action. And so I think we've got to focus on the allocation of those investments away from these legacy systems and more towards clean energy systems.
So there's an interesting piece in there about the amount of money that you would have to spend anyway, given that you have aging systems and aging buildings. I think, Hrisa, you touched on it a little bit, and you also have old buildings in your portfolio at ESRT. So I'm wondering if this piece about how do you spend the money that you're going to have to spend anywhere and how you shape the sort of story around that has been helpful or otherwise in the things that you're doing. Open to anybody.
I'll go first because I think Empire State Building this is a great example of this. And also everybody loves the Empire State Building. And we're going to light up orange and blue tonight when the Knicks win. So, and you guys should check her out because we light her up every time they win in Knicks colors. So, with LED lights. So, I think it's really important to talk about this, and I know Hrisa and I have worked together on many projects like this over the years. Empire State Building is 95 years old. And we share everything we do because of exactly the story Anthony's talking about and that Fiona was talking about. There is a way to make this business case for any building. When you're building a new building, like Fiona said, there's a budget. There's an HVAC budget. There's a controls budget. You use that budget to demonstrate that the most efficient advanced systems fit within that budget and develop better return on investment than a less advanced, or I would call a like-for-like or base code compliant solution. And it's up to us as professionals to demonstrate that every time. That's exactly how we make our business cases. And I'll give an example of a job we're doing now in the Empire State Building. We're updating the central plant. Now it is time for the chillers to be replaced. And when we make that business case, we say the like-for-like replacement would be X cost. And what we're doing is a much more efficient, advanced, reliable, responsible, affordable solution where we're developing, a more comfortable, more healthy, much more efficient system because it's 30 years later. And in that case, the business case is an immediate payback. And I think it's just really important to get the numbers out, to get the data out, to prove these cases and not lose a narrative where one side is making up things and the other side has real data. It's really important to get out there with all this real data and share that.
I see nodding heads from both Anthony and Hrisa. Do you want to come in?
I mean, I'll just add, yes, Dana and I, we've had many years. We physically worked together for like almost 8-9 years. And so that shared experience, I'll never forget when I was working on a project and I was like, Dana, these people don't care. And Dana's like, it's okay. Just show them the business case and show them, why they're going to save money or, they're going to have a more comfortable space. And then maybe they'll care later. Maybe they're not, but you're still getting them to do the work. And so I think that still drives us forward. Now we're in our individual different places, but we still sharing experiences and best practices. Sometimes that's the way to do things. And like Dana said, it's the phased approach. A lot of our buildings, it's end of life for the equipment. So what is the best approach? And sometimes even the operational side, when you're gonna switch maybe from steam to electric, sometimes then you don't need the same type of operating engineer. So it's like the whole picture of looking at things. I think that's one thing coming onto the owner side is really understanding all the pieces. Who runs the equipment? If you're gonna have more efficient equipment, you might not need 5 engineers, to run that. They're gonna be more efficient. The property managers overseeing the buildings. So there's a lot of efficiency built in, not just an energy efficiency. It could be an operating efficiency. It could be that the building then is better indoor air quality. So I think there's just a way to show the whole project through, and there could be wins for everybody, because I think there doesn't need to just be a win for one thing. I think if everybody can get a win out of it, whether the building's operating better or you're getting a return on your investment, I think at least we haven't had any problems moving big capital projects like that moving forward, especially when you're at the end of life. You just have to make the best case for it, and also too, sometimes it's a phase, right? Like on our multifamily buildings, making a better decision, actually with some great NYSERDA money from the Empire Building Challenge, is using some of the money from the Empire Building Challenge to make that investment to change our chillers, but then creating that infrastructure so it's a phase. So maybe 5 years from now, geothermal might be a better option, but maybe it's not maybe having it ready, having that technology ready, but investing in the equipment that needs to get changed out, and then putting a plan to move forward.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add that, and this is the point I was going to bring up, is, how do we show that, right? And how do we not just show it to one individual building or one portfolio owner? And I think the Empire Building Challenge is a great example of that. And you both have been, really tremendous in moving that forward. But it's creating, these guidebooks and stuff to share out with other building owners to demonstrate, what is the business case for this? And it's partnering with national organizations to expand the awareness of that beyond New York, across the entire country. And so I think those are good models of how we get to scale.
So I've got questions from Slido, and all of you out there, if you would like to upvote the questions on Slido or put in new ones, I will try to get to your questions because that's what you are all interested in. One of the questions that is right here, how do you connect carbonization as its own goal, not necessarily shared with related wellness goals, to quality of life? So I think the question, how do you connect decarbonization to quality of life? Can you? Do you? Go ahead, HG.
I think if you don't, then this doesn't have a good ending. I think that's one of the most critical challenges for us is this incredible room of leaders who, I live in Philadelphia, but I've been serving however I can the leaders of many of you in this room for your success and impact. Tremendous honor, absolutely. So inspiring. And I get to do this in multiple cities as well, so I've got some contacts, some benchmarking I can do. New York rocks, I just got to tell you. And to get to your point, I think just take a moment to appreciate this moment right now. What is the name of the trophy that the Knicks want to hold up at the end of the series? What is the name of that trophy? Anyone know? The Larry Bryan trophy. And who is Larry Bryan? NBA commissioner who took the NBA to amazing heights in terms of engagement, involvement, sponsorship, all of that. Participation in the NBA shot through the roof with his leadership. The things we're trying to solve require such levels of participation, constant engagement, alignment, finding models that don't exist to make things work. Selling the change we want will not be sufficient. Winning at the change we want has great promise. Just watch what happens through this series with the Knicks and imagine we were playing for the trophy for what we are so committed to. Watch the narrative, watch the level of engagement, the mobilization of stakeholders, the alignment on what winning is, how the scoreboard is translating the information. How can we get an ounce of that into this space? And the thing I have found in doing this work that's essential is translating the conversation into a human well-being conversation and celebrating what those benefits mean to achieve, which encompass the energy conversation, right? It encompasses that, but it's more. Just like Chissell said at the beginning, what inspired him was what the human impact that was on the table with getting this right was about. The 90%, not the 3 or 2%. If we can pull that into this conversation, we can move mountains. And I saw that with how we helped the Hunts Point Food Distribution Center with the collaborative task force unlock $240 million in less than 18 months after a workshop we did, inspired by David Sandbank, who put forward, we got to solve this. It's unacceptable that 6,000 plus diesel trucks are idling 24/7, surrounded by NYCHA housing. Well, it wasn't until the Department of Health showed up and said, let me show you the avoidable deaths we're talking about. That made a huge impact on people leaning in to say, this is unacceptable, we need to solve it. And that's what the affordability piece is about.
So I think there's a piece in here about finding the thing that you actually want to change, right? So, and then you use the thing that you want to change and you build the decarbonization into the back end of that. So there's clearly some really powerful things about how do we put the things that we really want up front. And then there becomes a question about how do you make sure that decarbonization is coming up in the background? Because when you're selling decarbonisation in the front line, you're selling decarbonisation. When you're selling something else in the front, how do you make sure that that decarbonisation continues to exist at the back so that we are always striving to kind of understand that as a goal or a way forward? Have you got any insight on that thought? How do we make sure that decarbonisation kind of still stays in mind as a criterion in the same way that perhaps cost does when we're actually pursuing other goals?
I love a story you told, and I know this sounds terrible, but his story is correct for everyone in this room. But we do have to always keep in mind there are people you might be presenting to who don't have the same beliefs as you, and even people who don't care about other people's health or their own employees' health, right? It might not be a priority for them. And so it's interesting to understand the message that will come through. So to just be brutally honest about your question, I think that if the decision makers for Hunts Point or the decision makers for NYCHA, and this is not the case, they're concerned with doing all these things perfectly, but if they weren't, you could still make the same exact impact that HG made by talking to them about what did matter to them, right? And you can talk, and it's not bad to talk about that. You could talk about the avoided cost. You could talk about freeing up traffic. You could put it in the terms of economics and payback. There's nothing wrong with doing that. If that's what will get you to your end goal, that's okay. And I would say, you know, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, because if there's a lot of change we can make in a project, and there's a certain way to sell it to whoever the stakeholders are, our job is to find a way to convince those stakeholders that this is the right investment to make. And if they hopefully do value decarbonization, energy efficiency, clean, healthy air, pollution, as well as emissions, we can make the whole case. And if they don't, then we find out what will convince them and make that case. Hopefully they all believe in what you're doing, but sometimes they don't.
And I think sometimes you just have to believe more sometimes. And you have to get creative sometimes in how you do things. And that just actually makes me think, we have a conversion project we're working on, and we're always trying to find very creative ways of like, how can we reuse these materials, or how can we like not physically buy new materials? And it's being creative, because sometimes it does cost more to do these things. So you have to, what is the element around that? Is it then you're using a healthier material, and people care about their health? I mean, right, people don't want to hopefully get sick, you know, and have illnesses. So sometimes it's like Dana said, putting a different spin on it. So you might actually be saving carbon and reducing emissions, but sometimes it might just be like, guess what, we're using healthier materials here, or we reuse this material and didn't have to create a new one. And this is a healthy material, so you're living in a healthier space. So people care about, like, people spend 80% of their time indoors. So if you show them they're in a healthy, safe environment to work or to live, they care about that. If you can do all the other things in the background and you care more about that, that's just, work is still progressing. And sometimes if you get a small win, people might start jumping on that bandwagon too and want to create the whole picture. So small wins are important, and I agree with Dana, it doesn't matter how they're framed, as long as they're getting done, they're getting done.
So one of the questions that's coming up here a lot is about money, right? And of course, when you're selling something, money and the ability for the person you're selling to save money is often a pretty clear line of conversation. But many of you, I mean, you talked about money has flowed across this stage already with some of the grants and things that exist in the Empire Challenge. But what I'm thinking about here is, how do you figure out that sort of connection between long-term and short-term costs, and how do you make sure that, you know, we've always had this conversation about the sort of split incentive, the fact that the person getting the money isn't the person who gets the benefit. So how are we squaring that kind of conversation in this how do we sell decarbonisation when we're trying to cross kind of budget lines that can sometimes feel very rigid? Anybody want to talk about CapEx, OpEx, subsidy? That's really the question.
It's a tricky subject. But I think the split incentive is kind of a myth. And I'll explain why. When we do our energy models, we're actually extremely fastidious around what portion of energy is tenant-driven, what portion of the energy is landlord-driven. And Fiona and I and many people in this audience that worked on the Local Law 97 Commercial Buildings Working Group spent a lot of time on the role of the owner and the tenant. And what we come out with every single time is the same, is that it's both, right? They both need to partner and they both receive benefits. What the tenant pays for to build out their space to a high performance guideline, and we have these standards, we show them their individual business case. And what the landlord invests and spends on their end, we show in the context of the landlord's business case. We have split it out. This is all public. Our case studies are all public because we want other people to do this. And we've demonstrated that there is a business case for the owner and there is a business case for the tenant. There's a business case in a brand new building. There's a business case in a 200-year-old building. There's a business case in a building that thinks it doesn't have to do anything, but they always do, right? And our job is to make that case. So I would say that the myth of the split incentive often comes in when you have a landlord with tenants, like we are a multi-tenant building. We've been able to demonstrate how that works. When you're, the one area where it really does become a challenge is a triple net lease. And I won't get into the details, but there's also a way to demonstrate it there, right? Because you just have to educate the tenant to understand they'll save all that money. And then I really would just focus on the fact that when you look at the data and the way the cash really flows, the money is still all coming to the same company. If a corporation says, well, the OpEx is in a different bucket than the CapEx, that's fine, but it's still in the company's bucket. And so you just have to talk to them about how to do it. So I guess the message is, how do you show them the answer should be yes, and figure out how to get there?
All right, I'm going to change tack a little bit. And I think we touched on this a little bit, but there's a question here about how do we sell decarbonization as job creation and workforce development? So the underlying question is there a link, and how are we making it? HG, why don't you have a go at this one?
I will, but Anthony, I saw you were a couple of moments we're going to say something, so I'll tag team with you because your perspective on this is very interesting and the work you're doing. It is a whole narrative, and we have to see how these pieces all come together. And Dan, absolutely, in certain markets and circles, that conversation I was saying is not going to land. There's two sides to the well-being conversation here. It's the economic side and then the physical health side. And sometimes you lead with one or the other. Sometimes you lead with better NOI and lower cap rates, right? And you understanding, then the good thing is when you have governance supporting you and the nice structure you have here where Local Law 97 is the demonstration of good governance to hold the responsibility for overall well-being as well. Why are we having to create strategies for penalty avoidance? Well, that's the new reality, gratefully, we now live in. That creates benefits to the entire group that we need. So I like those pieces. I think with affordability and all of this, going back to the financial piece, how do we ensure that income for as many as possible is outpacing cost? Because affordability, in many ways, I feel is a conversation around a condition, a human condition. And if you look into the future, how many of you believe that costs and risk are coming down versus how many of you believe it's going up? And if it's going up, then the affordability conversation just gets harder and harder to solve. So we have to find a way to become more of a partner in economic development that outpaces costs and risk and bring that in this narrative. Now you're hitting the two things I would care for my child. If your parents in the room, this is what you care for your child, is wealth and health. May your child have extreme, amazing wealth and health. Well, how does that translate into this world?
And the question was about workforce
development.
Yeah, I mean, look, get anybody from labor in here, and they'll tell you that there's a real opportunity here. Our Clean Energy Jobs Impact Report shows the growth in jobs that are in clean energy, outpacing all other jobs. So there's a clear linkage here to workforce development. I think, we talk to contractors all the time. They are looking for more people, right, to do this work. I think when we think about what are the interventions that we're talking about here, we've got to recognize it's really infrastructure. everything from energy efficiency to large-scale new resources is infrastructure. And that all requires workers. So that to me is like the easiest linkage to make, is this all comes with more jobs.
I was in Washington DC yesterday, and then we all had a roundtable conversation, and actually the big theme there was also we can't find the labor that we need in order to build the things that we need to build according to the things that we're doing. So there's something in here about job creation, workforce development, and how we make sure we've got the people to do the work. Now, how exactly we link that to selling decarbonization, I think, is a tricky question that maybe we're not quite game for in this moment. Anybody want to have a go?
Oh, I think they're totally linked because, and trying to think of the best way to say this and not be controversial. Like, if students think there's not a job market for all the things they dream of doing in this area, and I know there are young people in this audience who believe in this kind of work and they want to have a job that makes a difference. My children are both in college. I know they both want to work in some way on impacting, environmental responsibility, sustainable engineering, good policy. And I want to make sure that all children, not just the children who live in my house, are able to understand that there is a business case for this. The number of young people that I guest lectured who came to me 2 years ago and said, should I still major in this, is mortifying. So I think there's a huge link between having a qualified workforce and making sure that workforce understands that they're in a growing, profitable, reliable line of business, so that they do study this and they do take, whether it's union training in the field, which is massively necessary, or whether it's university training to understand how to do these designs. I think it's incredibly important that people taking this training of any age understand this is a viable business now and in the future, so that we do have a qualified workforce. You have to show that they're viable. So I think there's a huge link.
Yeah, I think that's right. I will be controversial. I mean, I don't know why we have to ask the question, how does this relate to decarbonization? I mean, if you're an HVAC installer or electrician and you don't care about climate, you care about, well, there's new technology for me to install. So while we should all be aware and recognize that so that we can really tell the value of this work, yeah, that's what we need to do. But we don't have to be out front and making the linkage to decarbonization as we're out there having the conversation. It doesn't matter to some people, right?
So I think that comes back to this, how do we talk about climate change in the current landscape? And I think, Dana, you started with, well, maybe sometimes we don't. We talk about the things that matter to the people that we're talking to, and then we figure out how to backfill the idea around climate change and kind of keep it front and center for the people who are in the technical detail. We've talked a little bit about labor and workforce, and there's a piece here which is very much related to that. There's a question that says, how do we decarbonize in the current AI and data center boom? So we're going to have to go there at some point this afternoon, so why not now? How do we think that the part of our political and rhetorical landscape is data centers? Are they a good thing? Are they not a good thing? Is AI killing jobs or making jobs? Thoughts on that as related to the climate agenda?
Yeah, sure. I'll start.
We're all experts,
Why not?
Right?
Yeah, so it's a good question, right? And we're at the beginning of that and wrestling with it now. But I think there's a real opportunity here, and we should think about this as an opportunity. How do we use the growth in data centers and AI? And I think about those two things a little bit separately because they both have different opportunities. But we need to start thinking about large kind of energy users and how they can contribute to the system, right? What flexibility can they bring to the system? And the Public Service Commission has a proceeding out now on large loads. I encourage everybody to look for that and provide comments.
You can use AI to make it more digestible. 7,000 pages.
Yeah, very good. But there are ways to think about, you know, if a large data center is coming in, what type of call it host community benefit program or however you want to term it, but can maybe add energy efficiency and distributed energy resources into the system as part of that agreement to come in and be connected to the grid. AI also has the opportunity to help us with optimizing our energy system, and you know we are at kind of the beginning of that now. You know, NYSERDA, just in partnership with RPI and Clarkson, NYPA, National Grid, and Brookhaven submitted a grant application to DOE to look at how you can use AI models to provide the best information to system operators, both at the bulk system and distribution system, in real time to really optimize the infrastructure that we have now. So there are real opportunities both in how we apply AI to solve AI's energy demand, as well as how we think about new large energy users coming in and how they can you know, provide flexibility and capacity to the system.
I would like to see some more leadership currency given to those in AI and large loads that are committed to being part of the solution, not the problem. I often find these conversations happen as like the third party that's not in the room that we're saying about how can AI and large load growth be a part of the solution, not the problem. I would like to have a dedicated chair for them that's available for any leading AI, large load, to always be able to get on the stage and say, and this is what we're doing that's enabling incredible transformation on this issue, which is why we're this great solution that everyone's paying for and everything, but the value somehow keeps going out of the community versus getting circulated back in.
Yeah, and I'm biased because I think engineers will solve this problem. And we started doing this years ago. So I just always think like there's not enough room at the table for the nerds who are figuring it out for real, right? And it's a good thing. But like when I was at JLL, we started our mission critical, like green mission critical group, and we developed the first LEED Gold certified data center in North Carolina, and that was almost 20 years ago. There are ways to develop data centers that are far more efficient, to target a PUE under 1, to use renewable energy. They're actually one of the best opportunities for renewable energy and storage because they have massive roof space and usually parking lot space, and they're in the middle of nowhere, right? So there's no reason, again, messaging. If you allow the people who are not trying to find a good solution to control the narrative, then all of the great solutions are not out there. I think it's our job to make sure the data and the facts, like Anthony started with these great facts, all these stats, how great these programs are, how much energy we're saving with a payback. We need to get that good work out there. So there is a way to make very efficient data centers, to have data centers that leverage storage and renewables, and even beyond that, that help with time of use because they're 24/7, right? They can help balance the load if it's in partnership with the grid. And also all the work we do to reduce the energy use of all the other buildings creates the negawatt. And that energy can then be used by data centers that are working as efficiently as they can. I wish this narrative was more positive, and I agree with HG also. There are some amazing stories, for example, coming out of Microsoft and Google around what they're trying to do to lead with way more efficient data centers.
So I think I think Anthony was a really helpful kind of breakdown of data centers and AI are not the same thing. There are obviously linkages between the two of them, but the data centers actually, in this conversation, it's really about places where there are large concentrations of load, where actually there's a conversation to be had between the demand and the supply side. And that actually is a really real conversation when it comes to decarbonization. So I think there's a whole set of conversation over there. And then there's another set of conversation over here about whether the AI techniques that are now available allow us to use data in different ways or to find other ways of doing things that we might not have been able to think about or been able to sort of just bring the calculation maths to before. Anybody want to say any more on that, or shall I find us another question? There are some questions here around in adopting on-site renewables. There are some questions about sort of creating a bit of positive jealousy. Neighbours sell to other neighbours. So if you put solar panels on your roof, your neighbour will do too soon. I'm sort of connecting that with this demand-supply load thing. I think this is probably a question that wings its way towards you as in NYSERDA. Some of these grid issues, these bigger grid issues, it's a conference full of people who work on buildings, but are there things we should learn from some of the conversations perhaps that have been happening between the suppliers and the people with large demands at state level? Is that too complicated a question? I do that sometimes.
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, NYSERDA with the Department of Public Service right now have been, over the last year or more, have been looking at kind of grid flexibility, right? What are the resources out there that allow for grid flexibility and to optimize our system? And there's a real opportunity there and a necessity, right? You know, there's Lawrence Livermore National Lab estimates greater than 60% of all the energy that's produced is wasted, right? So think about all the opportunity there to change that. And you know, the resources that are pulling from the grid all have the opportunity to operate in a flexible way that balances and optimizes the system. And so there's a lot of work going on now in understanding what are those resources and how do we capitalize on those.
Somewhat linked question, but it's the top voted one, so I'm going to ask it. For existing building retrofits, so I think this is aimed at you too, how do you sell electrification when electrical rates keep rising and the cost of electricity is more than fuels like gas?
What was the first part?
It's about the comparative cost between electricity and gas. So when you're making the case for existing building retrofits, how do you get to electrification?
So
maybe the face says everything.
Yeah, no, I mean, we do. We make that case all the time. But it's not hard to make that case because, again, we have hopefully long-term hold assets. And that is part of the case. And part of it is compliance if you don't have a long-term hold, so there's no excuse. But the way that we do it is, again, a balance. We make the best business case we can. So I have found, at least in most of my studies, that we can do beneficial partial electrification of existing buildings. And again, that's not a bad thing, that's great. We actually get to 80%, right? The Empire State Building, we have installed heat pumps. We're working really closely with NYSERDA and Con Ed to kind of prove out how they really work. And we've been able to make cases for partial electrification, right? When it's 0 or less than 0 degrees out, we might need to use our steam as backup, and that's great. We also want our steam system to be decarbonized and much more efficient, and we're working together with DOB and Con Ed on efforts like that. But in the meantime, we work on beneficial electrification, partial electrification, where it makes sense, when it makes sense, and we also compare natural gas to electrification in the long term, and we use escalation rates that are very conservative. When you look at long-term backward trends in natural gas and electricity, that's actually what we use on the forward look, and in reality, the costs have gone up much more than we thought. That actually improves our business cases, right? Just so everybody understands that. And for buildings that do have natural gas boilers, for example, we're working to make them as efficient as we can. And then when those boilers are ready for replacement, we'll evaluate the viability of replacing them with, heat pumps, for example. So it's just the way we would always do things anyway, right?
Yeah, and I was just going to add that, Mark Levine touched on this earlier. He talked about energy independence, energy security, right? And I think, that can't be lost on this as well. It's not just electrification, but it's electrification with weatherization, right? So it's those two things together, and it's trying to insulate ourselves from these.
Pun intended, right?
Pun intended, yeah. You know, but to insulate ourselves from these the geopolitical volatility that is out there. So gas may be cheaper now. It doesn't mean it's always going to be cheaper, and so I think that's part of the story that we have to tell as well.
Yes, I think there's a decarbonisation story that goes with the ability to operate more passively, which I think is what the weatherization and insulation program does, and that if we can get to something that operates more passively, then actually it is more resilient, irrespective of the decarbonisation benefits that come with that. There are two linked questions in here, so I'm going to ask them together. Now I've lost it. There's a question here about some cynicism about the adoption program for Local Law 97, which I think couples with this CLCPA not perhaps being, maybe we won't quite make it. That's the question. I'm wondering, as we put those two things together, is the sort of uncertainty that perhaps is existing around Local Law 97 changing the way in which we're thinking about decarbonisation? Some people are very certain about Local Law 97 still. Some people are less clear that it's happening because some of the underlying assumptions are not necessarily there. Do we have thoughts about that? It's the top voted question in some parts of this world.
Uncertainty of whether Local Law 97 is going to go forward?
Well, I think Local Law 97 is on the books, so it's going forward, right? That is clear. But it had underpinning it some of the work that came from the CLCPA, which is looking a little bit like it might not happen as fast as it otherwise might. Of course, that law's also still on the books, so we know that that's going to happen too. But there's the question in here is CLCPA maybe not going to deliver, and that uncertainty is causing some conversation about Local Law 97. So I'm wondering if you think that there is anything in here where the uncertainty is changing the way that we're thinking about decarbonisation.
I mean, I guess I'd start, and you all jump in because you operate these buildings that need to be compliant. But you know, Local Law 97 was never designed in a very prescriptive way, right? It left the optionality open on how you achieve those performance targets. So if someone was counting very heavily on kind of a very high renewable grid, that's not the only way to achieve it. Local Law 97 also permits and allows building owners to buy renewable energy credits here in the state as to help on the electric side. And there's both the electric side and the heating side that need to be addressed. So it's true, we're not achieving the penetration of renewables in the system at the pace that we may have hoped for, and that's a reality that we have to deal with. But again, the way to comply with Local Law 97 wasn't heavily prescribed. There's optionality there. But Dana, I don't...
Well, I'll say, I think if you were on the panel, not the moderator, you might be thinking the same thing, which is on our working group, we put a ton of work into this specifically, which was to make sure that we projected as best as we could, and we're all volunteers, what the emissions factor of the grid should be at the years in which Local Law 97 changes its severity or stringency. So the coefficients that are set for 24 through 29 versus 30 through 34 versus 35, we put a ton of work into trying to make it so that, number one, they were as accurate as they could be for where CLCPA was supposed to be at those times, and then balancing that to make sure that building owners would not be penalized if the grid moved a little more slowly with its goals, right? Which we thought it would, just to be clear. And that's not negative. It's great to be aggressive with the law, which is what New York State did. It's not, again, messaging on the fact that it's not a failure, it's just moving slower. And that's a heavy lot of work to do to like change transmission, distribution, and generation of energy, right? Again, we need to work on our messaging. But I think that understanding that Local Law 97 was based on CLCPA, and the owners, we also, for those of you who don't know, Local Law 97 assumes and is based on the study of the fact that half of the savings come from buildings reducing energy and half of the savings come from the grid. We as owners are doing our best to make the business case and the engineering case for reducing our energy by 50%. And then the grid does the rest, and we do it together as partners, and that's why NYSERDA's role is so important. So I don't think it's a negative. I just think we continue to do the work in an objective, fact-based way.
Well done. I mean, they're difficult questions. I think we had to go there, but I'm going to pull us back to the original question on the table, which is how do we sell decarbonisation, and how do we talk about climate change in this current environment in order to be able to get ourselves to move forward? So there is a question here: how do you sell decarbonisation to low-income tenants and property managers? So thinking about the affordability issues, what happens at that intersection, I think, is really where this question is driving towards.
Do you want to talk about I think the NYSERDA-NYCHA partnership is a good example.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been talking around this issue this whole time, and again, I'm going to say, like, you don't need to sell the decarbonization. You have to talk about the benefits of the work that we're doing. But Dana's right. You know, the programs like Empire Building Challenge and the Clean Heat Challenge that we had, where, you know, we are one of NYSERDA's kind of functions in the market is I think of it as being a choreographer, right? We are connecting different market participants with one another, right? Those that have a challenge with those that can solve the challenge, that have the infrastructure in place to solve that challenge. And so this pilot that we've done with NYCHA is bringing product developers together with building owners to demonstrate that there is a demand for a new product that will allow the product developer to invest in it. So this was, you know, air source heat pumps that could easily be installed in existing windows with no electrical upgrades required, and allow tenants to control the heating and cooling in their apartments. And so you have a very large initial offtake agreement that is demonstrating to product developers that there's a market here. And it goes well beyond just NYCHA. There, you know, this is demonstrating, you know, that there's New York City housing. It's huge, but there are other housing agencies across the state and across the country. And what works in affordable housing can also work in market rate. So it's bringing those different parts of the market together so that they can understand what's the need and where the demand is.
I get caught up on the selling decarbonization to low-income families or housing. I think try doing that with the Knicks game on. Good luck, right? It's just not going to be what people are going to want to engage in. But if it's about sharing how you're a committed, trusted partner for a better future, that involves this path of decarbonization, health, better health outcomes, better pathways to wealth creation. If that is a credible narrative that you can stand behind with many others essential for that to come true, other stakeholders, then now it's a different conversation. Now you're building trust, you're building people leaning in, and you're all racing to a tipping point of realized benefits so that this is real for enough people who are saying this is positive, that it's not you waving the flag anymore, right? You have advocates and champions everywhere wearing the jersey.
All right.
I was just going to add, I mean, it doesn't, I went back to what I said, doesn't matter what type of tenant, office, residential, any type of everybody's going to care about their family. They want to have a space where, they feel safe, they have, proper indoor air quality, and they have heating and cooling. So if we can provide that with partnership, like with all those great programs that NYSERDA has, so like if it works, if it can work for NYCHA buildings, it can work for anybody. I mean, so it's not selling it, it's just like providing, a place for people to live where they feel comfortable and safe. And at the end of the day, if we can also decarbonize, that's amazing.
All right. Thank you for that. I'm going to do 2 speed rounds before we finish off. So the first one of this speed round is if you had the power to change one thing so that you could accelerate the adoption of decarbonisation, what would it be? Just one thing. It's always a speed round. You don't have to talk for very long.
Look, it would be to accelerate the introduction of lower cost new technology, right? That's what we have to do. And our innovation programs are really looking to drive these technologies down the cost curve.
To make sure people deal with accurate facts instead of making things up.
All right, fact. Hrisa.
Can I just say all the previous answers all together?
I'll go. I promise to go the other way for the other speed round.
Oh, and like believe in science.
Believe in science. Well, science is facts, yes. No, I think it's all of those kind of things together. Have the proper information. And I don't know what you're going to say, but I'll add his in too. Proper information and the correct package that's affordable to make this all work with trusted partners. I mean, we are lucky in New York. We have NYSERDA, we have Con Edison. There's a lot of good trusted partners that believe in science, believe in facts of how to make this work. That was way more than one thing, but I think it takes more than one thing to make this all work.
I would go, if I could change one thing, I think is our collaboration framework. I would like to see it move more from an emphasis on engagement to mobilization. If we go back 6 years, it's COVID. We partnered and did things together in ways we've never done before because it was urgent and we were aligned on what winning meant. And we got to find a way to bring that to this. It takes us to the next level.
So I think that's innovation, cost of technology, facts and science.
I'll say it takes a village.
It takes a village. All right. And then I think something about the communication and the language and being able to kind of get the right things out front. So my second question is this a short-term aberration? Are we one superstorm or one federal administration away from putting climate change back in the heart of the agenda?
Better be.
How many heart attacks do you need to have to know that you need to go to the doctor? Some people it takes more. I mean, I don't know if any other people have stubborn parents, but it's like, I think that sometimes it helps, gets us back, unfortunately, because it comes at a tremendous cost as well.
I think we got better be out of Dana. Hrisa, what do you think? Are we one aberration away, or is this an aberration, or is this our new landscape?
I'm just going to leave us on a positive note. I think whatever environment we're in, we just have to just keep moving forward, and we can't let these be setbacks. We just work in different ways, maybe, like I said, more creative ways. So I try to not look at my glass. Well, it is half here, but yes, it's more full than empty. So I think we just have to keep moving forward, and there's going to be setbacks, but for every setback, maybe we can still move 2 steps forward. So I'm going to have a positive outcome on it.
Anthony?
I'll say this is positive as well, but I don't think this is an aberration. I think that lesson learned, we should be talking about this with the full range of benefits that comes from this work. And we as a species are very myopic, right? We don't do well with long-term. So I think that as we've talked about here, like this is not out. It's just that we're now describing it based on the full range of benefits that this work provides. And I think we need to continue to do that. We've got to make sure that, like get out of the bubble that is New York City or New York State, because we want this to succeed across the nation and globally. So I think we have real opportunity here, lesson learned.
All right, I'm not exactly sure how to summarize this, but I am going to have a go and say that I think that there's, as I said at the beginning, we are singing at choir practice. So I think that everybody in the room is thinking that this is something that is a durable agenda, right? The climate change, decarbonization and agenda is an important one, not only on its own merits, but actually because it brings an enormous number of co-benefits. And sometimes those co-benefits need to be in the lead, and sometimes it is the one in the lead. And I think your point about this is, in some ways, the conversation has become more real by the challenge that is currently that it is currently experiencing, simply because we actually now have to talk about the full range of benefits rather than sort of allowing one thing to trump all. That was also an unintended pun. All right, by allowing, anyway, it's a balance of things that we need to put together. There is nothing that actually drives the full agenda, and actually keeping that in mind may be a more healthy way for us to talk about it, so that we cover workplace benefits and workforce development and the way in which our buildings work for the people within them and our communities and society as a whole. So I think, thank you very much for all of your positive and sort of around the table views on how we sell climate change how we sell decarbonization. We're not selling climate change resistance in the current rhetorical and political environment. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Go Knicks.
That was a fascinating journey with our expert panelists. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Fiona, Anthony, Dana, Hrisa, and HG. Really appreciate you spending some time with us today. We could not put on a conference like this without the generous support of our sponsors, so I want to say thank you again to Carrier for sponsoring today, and also for many, many years of support of Urban Green and the broader green building community. And we have a short video that we're going to share with the audience.
No matter where we are in the world, our needs for a fulfilled life are basically the same. Togetherness, connection, support. It's why for more than a century, we've engineered climates that enhance lives, help businesses thrive, and move industries across the globe. And every day, we're innovating smarter ways to make life better, all across the world we share.